the bottom level of the sense-making crisis is, I'm not saying necessarily believe me on this, but consider this. So when you're interacting with your Facebook feed, you have a series of things. They scroll past. You have the option to either like or share them, right? Same kind of thing for Instagram and all the other social media stuff. You have a feed of information. You decide whether or not to share this information, decide whether or not to upvote this information. That's what a neuron does in a brain. Okay. So a neuron has a nucleus, the nucleus attached to dendrites. The dendrites get signals, which is binary signals from other neurons. And then however those come in, the neuron has some kind of generator function inside of itself that evaluates that and decides whether or not to fire a signal down the axon, and then that goes off to other neurons, right? That's what you're doing on your Facebook. You're behaving as a neuron in a brain. And when things go viral, when things propagate through social networks, I mean, there's a lot of study on this, it looks kind of like a brainwave, right? It looks like something that's passing through a brain. The rub is this. The rub is several things. Is first off, the neuron doesn't know what the brain's thinking. The neuron exists at a level down from the brain. So if you and I and everybody else were participating as neurons in a brain, we could not even comprehend the thought that the brain is having, because that thought is one level up, right? It's like a Kurzweil singularity thing. It's like the next level intelligence. How would you even know that there's a next level intelligence? You couldn't talk to it.
Now, I've spoken about this before. Let's conceptualize humanity as a computer. We're a massive processing machine that we are working out and working through content, material, ideas, all of this stuff. We're just one level up. This, conceiving of humanity as a giant thinking machine. And so when you think about across the board of humanity, one way of thinking about what we're doing is we're working on something. Do we know what we're working on? No, we don't. We're going to get into that soon. But I love this sort of level up metaphor that he's working.
So postulate for a moment that if you could web enough people together in a like and share network, that they would exceed a certain level to where their network itself was effectively a thinking superorganism, one level up from them. And that there's no way you could know that one way or another.
Thinking superorganism. Now, being a pastor, you would call this its body. And in church language, it would be the body of Christ. But the body of Christ has a head. I mean, he starts talking and it's like, oh, look, we're doing theology. And we didn't even realize it.
The thing I'm talking about right now is kind of improvable. Postulate that if you had some people in one social network, some other people in another social network, those two social networks might have these kind of internet entities that are thinking different things and are competing with each other for overall available brain space in the human population to survive.
Wow. Again, this is just straight out of the New Testament. You have principalities and powers. I mean, these conversations, this is what drove me crazy when I first started doing this, because my other clergy couldn't see because they're all dominant within, basically so deep within the church organism that they couldn't see out of it. This is all New Testament language that's going on here.
So there's some talk in like very dark intellectual circles that I traffic in where they're calling these things egregores, because that's what an egregore is. Like the definition of an egregore was a kind of demon that manifests out of a shared belief system.
A demon that manifests out of a shared belief system. Oh, you mean like school spirit? You mean like the spirit of your church or the spirit of your club or the spirit of your family or the spirit of your city or the spirit of your nation or the spirit of your tribe or the spirit of your political party or the spirit of your Discord server or the spirit of your conversation? This isn't new to us. We don't talk like this most of the time, but isn't this exactly what we're talking about?
And I think it's possible that we are so far down the sense-making rabbit hole that those kind of things are literally the things that are influencing people's behavior at this point.
This kind of thing is occupying all of our behavior. We, in fact, are in the clutches of spirits. And when you can't talk your political rival, your political adversary, as a pastor, I deal with this all the time. The really stubborn things that drive us crazy are relational trouble. Why? It takes a lot to move spirits. We are very weak and very inept. Well, how would you grow in spirit? Well, it's obvious we're going to do things relationally, but it's also going to be working on us from what? Well, we have to surround ourselves with spiritual things that impact our spirit. And that's going to be, well, it's where you put your attention. It's worship. It's what you're looking at and reading and what you're meditating upon and what is forming your body and the practices that you undergo to pursue that. And then you become stronger spiritually, and then you can actually have an impact on other people, because that is always the test. The spiritual person, now again, you must test the spirits, but the spiritual person has a power with others. Well, you've got to name the spirit. Well, why are we always looking for, it was critical race theory? Well, that got all complex, so that name wasn't quite right. It's wokeism. Okay. Well, there's issues with the name, but that's what we're using right now, wokeism. And now we've got the egregore, and we're going to use that name. And we're looking around for names, because once you name it, well, now you've got a handle on it. And someone might say, well, yeah, but that's always true. Yeah, it's always true. Well, that doesn't mean like spirits. What are you still thinking in a Cartesian dualism, that spirits are these other things? And now, again, I'm saying that this is the way the world is. Modernity is receding, and what we are understanding is that modernity, sort of as Christianity light, covered up a whole bunch of things. And now that it's going away, we're saying, oh yeah, egregore, that word helps us understand how the world works. And these people are in the grips of a certain principality, and something stronger needs to come and move them. But it's that picture thinking. All these pictures are limited. All analogies are limited. But analogies are necessary, because we are amphibious, spiritual, material creatures. We are always going to be working right there at the boundary between the upper and the lower register. Because remember, spirit moves matter. When Jesus talks about the definition of spirit in the Gospel of John, you don't see the spirit, but you see when the wind blows the trees. And remember, spirit and wind are the same word. That's why wind. And so we talk about the winds of change, and we talk about all these metaphors that we use out of our physical space. That's the language that we have that fits us best, that we can, as Vervaeke keeps saying, as we can grasp.
And that's what I've been saying that's why I named the blog Hand Waving Creek Outtery. I've been saying that since 2018. When COVID hit, I was like, oh, well, this is obviously going to play out this way. Everybody's looking around like, you're all wrong. And then they're all looking around going, how come everyone's crazy? I'm just looking back at my 2018 articles going, duh. Right? It's just, and also it's going to happen again. And also it's going to happen again. People like fighting wokeness, for instance.
No, it was Trump. Or no, it's Biden. No. We battle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers.
Can you summarize it in 2 or 3 minutes?
The sense-making crisis itself? Gracious.
Yeah.
Nigh infinite information and a lack of trusted gatekeepers causes echo chambers, which then feed back on their own information silos to create micro insanities. And the fertile ground of these micro insanities provides purchase for potentially next level group intelligences to emerge that are manipulating the people within the echo chamber to behave in a certain way. So here's the thing. Did these egregores exist before the internet? And in a more spiritual sense, I don't know. Does the ones that are forming now, are they of the same nature of the ones that formed before? Hard to say. But I think that we can make a really good argument that even if these things didn't used to exist, that they're certainly either exist now or will eventually because of this new space that we created in our phone. You keep showing your phone, I'll show mine. This is a place where they can certainly live.
Yes.
Here's an idea for you to make you scared while you're making your eggs in the morning. How much more efficient would one of these egregores be if it had purchased inside a group of people who are all connected to Elon Musk's Neuralink?
When I was trying to talk to people about this word spirit, I often use the example of school spirit, because using your definition of an egregore, schools pay a tremendous amount of attention to school spirit. School spirit is something participatory. School spirit is something that the school administration doesn't have full control over, certainly has some influence, but together with the students, and they use pep rallies, and they use cheerleaders, and they use football teams, and they use all these kind of things to try to develop a spirit in the school. Because the administrators and the teachers and the students and the parents all know that if the school has a healthy school spirit, lots of things will happen in that school that everyone wants. They want children to learn. They want them to be happy. They want school to be a pleasant place. They want the relationships between teachers and students to be exactly right. We have the same thing for cities. And you know, Chicago is the city of broad shoulders. New York is the Big Apple, and we use symbolism and all these kind of things to sort of get into what is the spirit of a city. This conversation has a spirit, and you and I have been making this spirit as we've spoken, and you and I have brought to the creation of this spirit everything that we've been writing and doing and thinking, our parents, our grandparents, the incidences of our lives, parenting, all of these things have come in. And so when we say we are spiritual creatures, well, at least within a modernist frame, I've sort of made an articulation that even people who are skeptical about, and it's not really, people aren't really clear about what they're skeptical about. The idea is that after the Enlightenment, the only spiritual agents that are publicly acceptable in public discourse have ones wrapped in skin right now. Yet, when we talk about America, we talk about Uncle Sam. And I ask people, is Uncle Sam real? And then suddenly, well, there isn't someone living in a house in Washington, D.C. that is Uncle Sam. But so in that sense, Uncle Sam isn't encased in skin, but Uncle Sam is real enough to have us send him money and send him sons into the army and to participate in the spirit of Uncle Sam. Now, so from a fairly modernist way, you can sort of get an appropriation of, okay, what is a spirit and how does that work? What is the proper mode of language and imagination with respect to engaging them? And that's where this all gets very, very religious very, very quickly, because when you read religious texts, that's what they're full of.
I'm blanked.
Well, well, the way this works for people is, well, here's a question. Should I pray to the American Stock Exchange? Well, what does that mean? Well, what is prayer? What is worship? I mean, worship is fundamentally an attempt to give attention and to direct one's being towards that which is greater than can be conceived. I mean, I can throw in all kinds of religious definitions. And when you talk about cell phone addiction, what is this little machine? This is an attention machine. It's functionally worship when it comes to human beings.
I've got a question for you. As we're kind of running up on time, but this is kind of an important question. So on the presumption that these kind of egregorical concepts have manifested from human interaction and our social interactions over the course of human history, and that the internet is just a different way they can happen. All right. We'll call those the classic egregores. I think we've demonstrated that it's at least plausible that the social media itself creates a fertile ground for these kind of things to pop up. And that in so popping up, they will either be entirely divorced from the classic egregores, or they might be some kind of, hijacked mode. Depends, right?
Yeah.
But here's my question to you. In a fight, which one do you think wins? It's a tough question, isn't it?
Nassim Taleb has a wonderful thing he talks about, the Lindy effect, in that old things have a certain battle-testedness about them.
Yes.
And so it's one way to conceptualize history is always old versus new. And old and new are always at war with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And almost always old continues to endure by adopting and colonizing and adapting to new. And new continues to endure because old decays. And I think that's an issue like this. Why do people use historical arguments? Because if it's perennial, well, it must be true. So the Enlightenment, talk to Steven Pinker. We're not Christian. We're from the Greeks. And Tom Holland comes along and says, how well do you know those Greeks? Have you really read much of them? Because you sound like a Christian in terms of your values. You certainly don't sound like a Greek. Well, the Enlightenment was pretty much a product of Christianity. There's a ton here. I mean, it's once you stop and start seeing this thing, it's like, oh.
Yeah. So what's the goal for religion in the 21st century? Do you think the goal is to try and hijack these meme space entity egregores and try and steer them in a direction that's more beneficial for traditional dogma? Or do you think that the goal is to update dogma to try and keep up? Do you think that religion hasn't figured the answer to that question out yet? I'm curious.
So my definition of religion has basically to do with the deepest level of coding that we're participating in over the longest periods of time to try to productively interact with as large a sphere as possible. So it's a really super low basic thing. And in that sense, people who claim to not be religious, that's because in secularity, we sort of put religion over in a corner and said, okay, that's religious. It's going to church and it's all beliefs and supernatural and stuff like that. But what we really need to do to make life work is to work on the material level until we discover that you can give a person billions of dollars and somehow all of that materiality won't necessarily ensure the flourishing that they imagine they were made for. So, I mean, these conversations never end.
And I don't claim to be particularly religious. Like I don't go to church regularly, but it has always driven me nuts that particularly folks in the sort of modern atheist or post-rationalist spheres don't understand the value of the program. And, they're all screaming about coordination problems when we've had the solution for coordination problems for tens of thousands of years, if not longer.
Yeah.
And, you want everybody to act the same. Hey, I got an idea. Right. So it's like the one strongest tool they have to solve the problem that they've been thinking about this entire time is they're just scared to use it. And then on the flip side, there's some legitimacy to being scared to use it because if you make a new one, That's dangerous territory, right? Anybody who's, I would say the ratio of brand new religions that turn into awful and unproductive sex cults is like, noticeably high, right? So so this tool is not a tool you want to remake from scratch necessarily either, right? So I don't know. It's a difficult space, but it's a space that I've had a lot of fun thinking about, and I still don't know that I've got any of my major questions answered from this, but it's definitely given me more to think about it. Like, where does religion go the next century?
Well, if you think a lot about where does religion grow, think about me. I mean, that's all I think and talk about.
That's why I wanted to show up. And
what you laid out is exactly right, because what happens is that people say, "Gosh, what we need is sort of a community of people who meet together regularly and talk about the biggest issues." And it's my great sorrow that churches have structured themselves in such a way that people who have that longing look at churches and say, that's not what they're doing. And because it isn't what they're doing, because they've kind of siloed themselves in their own things. But then how do we do it? And then how do we? Yeah. So that is my job.